Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a fun time with that entertaining session. Now, next we have My Life, My Work, Girish Karnad in conversation with Arshia Sattar. Playwright, filmmaker, writer, versatile actor, and screenwriter, Mr. Girish Karnad is a Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, and a Jnanapith awardee. He has won the Central Sangeet Natak Academy Award, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya Award, and numerous national awards for his films. His plays include Hayavadana, Ma Nishada, Yayati, Tuglak, Nagamandala, and Bendakalu on Toast. While his movies include Samskara, Manthan, Nishant, Swami, Umbartha, Kadalan, The Prince, Dor, Iqbal, and Ek Tat Tiger. Arshia Sattar is known for her translations on the Valmiki Ramayana and the tales from the Katha Sarita Sagara. Her Lost Loves, exploring Rama's anguish, was shortlisted for the Crossword Non-Fiction Award. Her latest book is The Mouse Merchant, Tales of Money in Ancient India. She teaches classical Indian literature and is the director of Sangam House, an international writers' residency program located outside Bangalore. Ma'am, sir, I hand over the stage to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Of course, I can imagine that an opportunity to listen to Girish Karnad talk about his life and his work is, sufficient reason for as many of you to come out as you did. Of course, I'm not going to introduce Girish. It would be ridiculous. This is Bangalore. This is his home. This is his home state. Hello, Girish.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Hello, nice.
So, your life, your work.
Oh dear.
Yes, quite a life. I mean, enough to make a memoir that covers only half of it.
Yes.
But you're a playwright, you're a movie star. But more important, I think, than being a playwright and a movie star is the fact that you've actually been involved with and responsible for the new wave, both in theatre and in cinema in India, or you've been an integral part of it. And then, of course, after that, you've been, for want of a better word, a cultural czar. With the Film and Television Institute.
With no salary.
With no, as Sangeet Natak Academy. And then, of course, the Nehru Centre in London. And apart from all of that, you are by far my most favorite public intellectual. So,
Thank you.
what do you want to talk about first? Do we want to talk a little bit about...
You carry on.
What
Start.
happens next? I mean, you've done it all.
Oh dear.
What do you... What's
Well, I
left
think
for you
let
to
me
do?
say right away that I was very lucky, and that's why I wrote my autobiography. I was very lucky in the era in which I was born and I grew up. I was born in 1938. India was 10 years, when I was 10 when India became independent, and when I went abroad and came back in the 60s, this was in early 60s, 63, 64, India was only 15 years independent. And although it was a very depressing atmosphere economically, there was PL 480, there was talk of brain drain, there was talk of India having no future economically, etc. We were actually importing wheat from the States. And yet, it was a time, now looking back, when things were opening out. I mean, it was like, one thing after another. Curtains were opening. I came in 1960s. By that time, for instance, in 1950s, Satyajit Ray had opened a new chapter. This has something to do with the new India, I think. Satyajit Ray had started a new chapter in films and we were interested in it. In the early 60s, it was Alkazi with his theatre and so on. Then there was the Navya movement and there was theatre movement and all over. I mean, then, of course, by the 1970s and 1980s, of course, television came, and that opened a new chapter. I used to say, when I mentioned this, how doors used to open from 60 to 70 to 80, I used to say at one time that in the 90s, there were no new doors to open. And my son said to me, no, I think you are too old to open any doors. So after that, I stopped saying that now.
Out of the mouth of babes.
Yes, I know. So, well, that's it. The point is, one was in an era where after independence, we looked back. Before independence, who was the great man in Indian theatre? Shaw. You know, we're so dominated by the figures given to us by the West, Bernard Shaw. And we immediately said, no, we don't want Shaw. We don't want the drawing room with a sofa. We must look for something else. So one looked at folk theatre, one looked at Parsi theatre. At least I did. And similarly in cinema, I mean, the neorealism that came with Satyajit Ray. And I won't go on. I think
Please go on. This is your show.
And what was amazing, I think, in that generation is how we got together, how we reacted. My plays have been done by Al-Qazi. I have acted in a film done by Satyajit Ray. My films were directed by Satyadev Dubey, and so on. So there was a lot of give and take between Delhi and Bombay and Calcutta and South and so on, at least during that period. And that was tremendously exciting. I mean, there was a place called Walchand Terrace in Bombay, which was given to Satyadev Dubey for 5 years by Vinod Doshi and his wife for theatre thing. And it was a huge hall. It was the ground floor of a 5-story building. And when we had nothing else to do, we would go there. There would be rehearsals, there would be fights, there would be love affairs, all kinds of things going on. And what I'm telling is summed up by one experience. One night, I went to bed, drunk, of course, fighting with Vijay Tendulkar. And when I woke up next morning, Vijay Tendulkar was gone, and in his place was Badal Sarkar, who had come in the night and didn't know where to go and had come to Walchand Terrace. So this kind of, the whole sense of India, without making it nationalistic.
Right. But for exactly this reason, I think it's valid to ask you. There was so much going on. There was so much you could have done. You could have, and you did do. But you chose to be a playwright. Plays are the hardest thing to write. So why did you choose plays, and what does theatre mean to you?
If I had what I wanted, I would have been a poet. I wanted to be a poet. All my childhood, I wanted to write poetry, and I used to admire poets and so on. And then one day, when I had not done my MA, I finished my MA exam and hadn't finished them, and I was in my brother's house, and suddenly, sitting there, I started writing a play. I had just read Mahabharata by Rajaji, and the story of Yayati had stuck in my head, and it suddenly came out like a play, and it poured out, and there I was for the next 3 weeks, sitting somewhere, I think Gorakhpur or somewhere, where my brother was a railway officer. For 3 weeks, I wrote the play. And the play came as a shock to me because, one thing, it came out in Kannada. You see, I wanted to write in English. I wanted to be an English poet. I wanted to be with Yeats and Auden and out there. And I wanted to win the Nobel Prize, And suddenly here I was writing in Kannada, which I didn't want to write. Secondly, it was a myth from which I thought I had been alienated. And thirdly, I wanted to be a poet. Instead, I had written a play, But the intensity with which that play came convinced me that I was not a poet, but that I may make a playwright. There was a possibility. And after that, I started concentrating on plays. Fortunately, that was just before I went to England, and I was able to see a lot of plays there. The whole era of Shaw had ended, and one was looking forward to some guidance from people like John Osborne and the crowd. And I was terribly disappointed because all those plays were quite terrible. And that generation of English playwrights who came after Shaw were supposed to be great playwrights for the British, but for me, coming from India, they seemed to have nothing to offer. For instance, they were all plays that took place indoors. It was as though the British playwright was afraid to come out because it was raining, like that. While I had grown up out there on the road going and, meeting short stories and myths on the streets at night. It was an extraordinary experience, and I felt, no, this is not what is for me.
But you shouldn't give up your poetry ambitions because, like the other day when we were talking in another situation and I asked you, I said, did you write the songs in Hayavadana? And you looked at me and said, of course. So your poetry remains in sort of more hidden places. But I want to go back to this, to what you just said about Yayati
Well,
coming.
let me just answer
Okay.
that. I wrote those songs because I was in love. I was in love with someone, and I wrote half a dozen songs, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, except send them to the lady with whom I was done. Then when I wrote Hayavadana, I said, I can't waste these poems, you know. I must use them somehow. So I shout them in.
Well, we're very lucky
And
that you
created a
did.
new
So,
form.
yeah, we can remember you also as a poet. But when you talk of Yayati, and I've heard you say this quite frequently, that the surprise was that it came out in Kannada, and the second surprise was that it was an ancient story from a culture that you believed at the time that you were moving away from, right? Now, for me, my favorite of your plays are the ones that deal with myth and folktale, and I've always thought the genius of those plays is how you use something so traditional, something so familiar, to actually negotiate the big questions of modernity. You know, like Hayavadana especially, where we're talking about, something that has the head of something and the body of another thing. Is that a metaphor for India that is growing away from its traditional past? All of that. But your new plays, the last three, are entirely contemporary. Bikre Bimb and Wedding Party and Boiled Beans on Toast, right?
you.
So what is this? Is
Well,
this
let me just tell you one thing. If you are interested in any form, it's music, drama, or anything, you want to push. You don't want to get stuck. You want to push forward. You want to explore new possibilities, and you want to see what can you do that has not been done before. At least that's the way it's been for me. When I started writing, after Yayati and so on, I said to myself, God, I don't want to write realistic plays in the fashion of Shaw. There were many bad imitators in India, so I looked at the company natak, then, I looked at folk theatre, and I pushed and wrote my plays using songs, as I said, and folk theatre of that period, and historical plays, and so on and so on. Then recently, about 10, 15 years ago, when I went abroad for 2 or 3 years, I was in London, I came back, and I suddenly found in Bangalore that the new Kannada literature just didn't deal with Bangalore. All the Kannada writers were still dealing like Anantmurthy and me with where they had grown up, what was happening in the villages and what it had changed. But here was Bangalore. It was all around us, a new kind of Bangalore exploding, and no one seemed to be able to come to terms with it. And I felt that, if you are a playwright, you have to respond. Just as earlier I had felt that if you are a playwright, you have to respond to your past, because that had not been explored. That had not been looked at. Our folk tales had not been looked at. Here, someone like Ramanujan, for instance, was a great influence. People like Kirtinath Kurtkoti and so on. And now I felt, no, I must look at my contemporary experience, because people don't seem to be able to do it. So I have written these plays. Usually you see contemporary plays in India have meant social reform plays. They're all about how women are treated, or how Dalits are treated, or how children are treated, all of which are valid plays to write about. But I think these issues are so much more subtle today that we need to look at them, how do they emerge in the city?
Well, I think you should tell your son that this is the door that opened in the 90s for you. You're not too old to open doors. But to go back, the idea of like Indian plays being like about social reform, I think very much of Tendulkar when we talk about that. And one of the reasons I think that your plays remain so alive and so relevant is because they're not located in issues of a time, even though you are constantly responding to what is around you. Tale Danda, if I remember correctly, was written as a response to Mandal. And to some extent also to Babri Masjid. What do you do when a religious edifice, a literal one or a metaphorical one, collapses? So now, if I think your point is very well made also that...
You see, let me just explicate on that Tale Danda thing. The Tale Danda thing, the play was written when two things happened. One was the Mandal Commission, when in the upper caste students went on rampage against how what are called the lower caste were given advantages and so on and so on. And there was also the Babri Masjid, where the whole question of Hinduism came up. What do you mean by Hinduism? How do you say it? And it seemed to me that both these issues, had remained unchanged over centuries. And that if you looked at 11th century Karnataka, where the Vachana Sahitya and Basavanna and Akkamahadevi had looked at these issues, you saw those issues still there. What was amazing is how after 1,000 years, the issues still. So I said, let me write a historical play. Let me write a play about the 13th century. Fortunately, they were very intelligent people, Basavanna and so on. And this is always a great help. I wrote Tughlaq and suddenly discovered to my great delight that he was a very intelligent king. It's marvelous to deal with intelligent characters on stage because they endlessly open up all kinds of vistas you don't know. And similarly with these 11th century people who were great poets, the poems in it were translated for me by Ramanujan and so on. Well, there again I was responding, I think, to but I was not interested in writing plays on headlines. Newspaper headlines. Something happens today, you write a play. Something happens tomorrow, and you write a play. And so,
Yeah, now, because we're talking about the historical plays, Tipu Sultan, the dreams of Tipu Sultan, what a sort of surreal play that is. And to imagine that, a man who is, we know, as fundamentally a warrior and fundamentally somebody who had struggled to read and write, if he could, his father, of course, was completely, that he kept a dream diary, right?
Yes,
so
right.
surely, that's another historical character that surprised you by,
Yes,
by his
indeed,
intelligence, as you put it.
The actually prodding came from A.K. Ramanujan. A.K. Ramanujan was also my guru and had an amazing mind. He was interested in everything. And he came from Mysore and he was obsessed with Tipu Sultan. And he told me, I didn't know until then, that Tipu Sultan had actually kept a diary during his years, which he carried under his pillow when he went on, fighting on his campaigns. And whenever he had a dream, he would note it down in the diary and hide it and not show it to anyone. So here was this warrior who had spent his entire life on horseback fighting, but recording quietly his dreams, hiding them, which only came out when his palace was ransacked by the British at the end of the war. And I was fascinated. I said, what makes a warrior write down his dreams? And then I looked at the dreams and I said, these dreams are as much historical material as his battles, because he has written about them and he's need to write dreams. And therefore I wrote the dreams of Tipu Sultan. Usually people think of Tipu Sultan as the sword of Tipu Sultan, the great warrior or whatever it is. But the dreams of the dreamer, what kind of dreams? Not all of them are his dreams. Some I imagine for him, because you get identified with that character. And I said, well, there must be these kind of dreams, and
That's fantastic, dreaming another person's dreams. That's,
Yes.
something for Wendy to think about. But I want to go...
Some of them are quite ambiguously sexy. The
Yes, I
dreams that he
noticed.
writes. I mean, he writes a dream about a young boy who comes to him and is very arrogant, and he says to you, "You're an arrogant man. Get out of here." And the young boy again comes and opens the jacket he's wearing, and he has breasts, and he's thrown out. So until then, this dream is beautiful. Then Tipu Sultan comments on it and says, "I know who that character represents. It represents the Marathas," he says, because they are like that. So immediately there is a political interpretation. Freud is not allowed to step in there.
But that was his dream, not one that you made up for him. Oh, okay, we'll have to believe you. Yeah, so now, again, if we can return to the idea of the city and the way you are choosing to explore it. Is the city the new metaphor for the way we live in India?
I don't know whether it's a metaphor, but it's a reality.
Yeah.
And people see cities, particularly Bangalore, only in terms of, all these IT things and the things that the IT thing is. We are not aware of what's happening, unless you look at it, of what's happening with the population of the city. I mean, the population of Bangalore was 70 lakh, in 1971 was 30 lakhs. And today it's more than 1 crore. And it's just exploded. And where do all these people come from? Where do they live? And in my own home, there was for instance, this life makes you dependent on your servants. In my own home, there was an episode where a woman worked for us for 8 years. She was trusted completely. And one day my mother discovered that she was working in a neighbor's house also, without telling us, making more money, which is fine. And then in the neighbor's house, she has stolen a necklace. So the police came in. So my mother said, go to the police station. We don't want her to send alone. And I went to the police station with Bimla, this woman. And then the police started investigation. And the police said, no, I have to investigate your house. And she said, yes, come with me, come in. So I was in my car. I said, I'll take you in my car. So Vimla and the police officer and the lady police officer and me, we got into a car. And she took us into a back streets of Bangalore. And she got down and she said, that's my house. And she went and knocked on the door. And a woman came out, looked at her. And the policeman says, do you know this woman? And that woman says, yes, but I have not seen her for 2 years, and goes in. And Vimla says, how can you say that? You're my sister-in-law. I live here. You see, I left last night. And the woman has disappeared by that time, you see. And this woman, our cook, who was with us for 7, 8 years, persuades the policeman that is where she lived. Although the woman in the house has said quite blatantly that I haven't seen you for 2 years. Ultimately, the policeman decides to investigate from the woman. He goes and knocks on the door, calls the woman out and says, does she live here? The woman has disappeared, So whether she was telling the truth or not truth, so you live in a kind of surrealist world at that level. And I said to the policeman, as we were leaving, because I had to drop him, I said to the policeman, are you not going to arrest her? There are charges against her. And the policeman said, do you know, sir, if we arrest all these women, we won't have any space left in the jails. Because the whole of Bangalore is full of women who float around like this. They are like a scorpion, which immediately gets under a rock as soon as it seems, and you can't track them down. But they live. And this was the history of a woman who had worked for us for 7 years. Now, this, to me, is Bangalore. This is what Bangalore does to people. Not all the sort of, call centers and all that sort of thing. Yeah, that's there. That's quite attractive. The newfound freedom, the traffic and so on. But what the city does to things like this, to people. Now that's fascinating, I think, and
so
this couldn't have done it.
This incident actually gets used quite as it is in Boiled Beans on Toast, right? When she goes to her house and the other woman is there and says, no, I don't know this one. Yeah, I mean, I remember it from watching the play. So in a way, then,
the opposite example I'll give you is of a grandmother from Dharwad who came to Bangalore. She went watching Bangalore, and she had never seen a race. She went to the race course. The person sent with her went to the race course, and she started playing races and was hooked. And they couldn't get her out. I mean, she was there for 3 months. For 3 months, she attended every race. This family told me. And they didn't know. When she left, they tried to find out where did she get the money from to play all the races. And they found that she had pawned all the jewelry from the house. This is the grandmother. She just decided my grandson will look after it. Pawned the jewelry. Now, this is the opposite side of an orthodox 70, 75, 80-year-old woman coming here and discovering the city. And the joys of the city, horse racing. Now.
And she also appears in the play.
Yeah,
this gambling grandmother.
Now, this is it. It's actually a kind of montage. In a city, what happens is you never get a complete story. In a city, you never get a story that begins, it happens, and then it ends. It can happen in traditional forms, but in Bangalore, you meet people, things happen, they go, and Vimla, who disappeared, I don't know where she is now. After 7 years, she just disappeared. People come and go, walk out of your life, and it's almost like getting onto a bus and getting down from a bus, so that you're writing a play about what happens on the bus, which is Bangalore.
That's fantastic. I mean, as a way to think about the city as a place where stories are never completed. They're always in process, or it's such a transient population. Once you told me, which surprised me, that almost none of your plays has been produced first in Kannada. Is that true?
Yes, it's true.
Why is that?
I was very. one of the reasons was that theatre was very alive in the 60s elsewhere. As I said, soon after independence, there was a hunger for plays in the Hindi area. The National School of Drama started it, Al-Qazi started it. Plays were translated from all languages, and they were done in Delhi, then they were done in Marathi, because there were Marathi groups. They were done in Calcutta by Bengali groups and so on. So I suddenly found that as I became successful, my plays got translated. Suddenly I was told that the first show of my play was on somewhere in Mumbai or in Delhi or somewhere else. And it was a marvelous experience, and very rarely in Kannada. And of course, the other problem was that our brightest director, B.V. Karnad, was working in Delhi. So he took my plays, he took Tughlaq, he took Hayavadana, he translated them. He was a brilliant director. He revived Kannada, but he very often revived it in another language.
I find this really quite remarkable, because Kannada culture owns you. They're very proud of you. It's our Girish. He's such a great Kannadiga. So they should be producing your plays rather sooner than they do. Now, when we talk about the city, or even Bikhre Bim, which is located in a city, and Wedding Party, again, which is located, it has a very different kind of politics. Yeah, the politics of Talaidanda or Tughlaq are quite overt, or even the politics of Tipu Sultan, right? But these incomplete stories sort of manifest a different kind of understanding of what is political. Yeah? Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I think probably rather than someone like me who came to the city as a fairly successful person, a Dalit coming from the villages and coming to would understand that politics better, because he would come and find a new city, a new future, a new set of prospects, which I don't understand. I think this is the problem with people of Anant Murthy's generation or my generation writing about the city. We come to it as already established people with established politics. We can say that we are modern and we can look at it and try to analyze it, but it is not our inner experience, that city. And probably, I always feel that a person like Vimla, if she was to write, or if the Dalits were to write, you would get an insight into the city which you would never get, which I cannot provide unless I work on it.
But you could have chosen to live anywhere in India, right? Say, after you were at the University of Chicago and you came back, you could have lived in Bombay, Delhi, anywhere. In fact, you did live in many of these other cities. So what brought you to Bangalore? Is it a sense... I guess the question I'm really chasing in some strange way is this idea of what gives us our identity. And do you, somebody like yourself, who inhabits and speaks so many different languages...
Verses on Girish Karnad. No, I said my future is here. This is where I can annoy an Rangacharya, and I came back, I finished this and I said, no, my future is here. This is where I'll get a response. I'll never get any response. So that was what brought me back to India. I suddenly felt, this is it. This is the concrete audience. This is what I'm writing for. I can hurt them. They can hurt me. We share it, So that was the first step. Why I came to Bangalore is very simple. I came to Bangalore because my children's education. There were some very good schools here. And the schools in Bombay were getting overcrowded, so we had 2 children. We came here and they went to the schools here. They loved it. Bangalore was a beautiful place in those days. This is, of course, an old cliche to say it's gone to the dogs or whatever. But anyway, now we're stuck. It's very difficult.
A delightfully mundane reason, and I think it says very much about a young man coming back determined to win the Nobel Prize, and a father coming back determined to give his children a better life than the one they were experiencing in Bombay at the time. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'm going to let other people join our conversation.
They may have no questions. But
oh, I can't believe that. People are just dying to talk to you. See, they're already waving at me.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, so the last question, I think a very, very important aspect of yourself as an artist is your public persona, right? And as I said before, I think you are one of our most important public intellectuals, and my favorite, because I agree with everything that you say, and I'm very glad that you say it, so that the rest of us can just go, yes, yes, and tali, tali, instead of having to articulate these complex ideas for ourselves. What do you think is going to happen to the public intellectual in India that we are feeling at the moment sort of shrinking in on us in terms of what we can say and how we can say it and where we can say it. You've had a lovely few days. You've been accused of being a Nastik, and you clarified, no, I'm not a Nastik, I'm a Nirishwara, and you've got your own
just
little...
let me explain the situation. I was recently invited to inaugurate the Dasara festival in Mysore, and there was a protest. There were protests by the BJP youth wing because they said Girish Karnad has declared that he's a Nastika, and a Nastika should not be allowed to inaugurate Dasara proceedings. That was their argument. And of course, in reply, I pointed out that they didn't know what Nastika meant. That if you looked at Nastika, Nastika had nothing to do with God or not. The correct Sanskrit word there was Nirishwaravadi. And Nastikas were those who didn't like Chaturvaranya and so on. It has a sociological fact and so on. But the point is, it is true that increasingly, whatever statement you make, there is a protest from the right. And I have been facing this. Fortunately, in Karnataka, there was a very strong movement led by Gopal Gowda in the West. And we have had a long tradition of Shivram Karanth, Kuempu, Gopal Gowda, Anantmurti, Lankesh, who have been public figures. We have fought openly. We have fought with each other also, but fought against this. Someone like Lankesh, who was just a professor, started Lankesh Patrike, which revolutionized Kannada journalism, because before then, if there was an incident in the Lingayat fold, the Brahmins kept quiet. They said, this is a problem for the Lingayats. If there was a problem in the Christians, then the Hindus kept quiet. But Lankesh was like a steamroller. He just steamrolled himself through everything. He attacked Lingayats, he was a Lingayat, he attacked Christians, and suddenly he managed to liven up the whole atmosphere by saying issues matter, not caste. And this tradition has been a great tradition. And recently also, being with Anantmurti in the last election, when both of us attacked the BJP and Modi. In fact, everyone remembers that Anantmurti said, if Modi gets elected, I will leave the country, and he was asked what. But let's not forget that long before this, after the Gujarat riots, Tendulkar had said, if I had one bullet, I would have put it in Modi's chest, he had said. माझ्या गोळी असती तर मी मोदीला मारलीस, because we were so horrified by the Gujarat riots, and we had them. Now, things have moved since then, and the politics has moved. But I am glad to say that I'm happy to have had someone like Anantmurti. I'm happy to like Maralu Siddhappa and others, J.K. Govindra, who have stood up for certain values in politics and stood up, And this is a very strong tradition in Kannada of writers who take public stances. And, I'm here, the Times of India critic is here, and yesterday's Times of India said I called Anantmurti the critical outsider. Well, I didn't, actually. That was the sub-editor using his imagination, because, I think sub-editors must get frustrated sometimes. So, add a word or two, it doesn't matter. And so,
Times of India has done...
the point is, one thing Anantmurti was an outsider. There were many other things he was not, but he was not an outsider. He was an insider, he fought as an insider, and I fought with him as an insider. So
I think Times of India enjoys fixing your words. Perhaps you're not articulate enough for them or not poetic enough, because it's happened before as well. I am always very moved when you speak when you speak about politics, and I really hope that, the generations that follow, my generation and, younger than me, perhaps more importantly, that we do feel the need to be public intellectuals, to engage with public issues and not only be concerned, oh, this is my art and this is my craft and this is my job and, this is where I get my water. Okay. Join us, please. If you raise your hand, I will make sure you get a microphone. Please try and keep your questions short so that we can hear more.
Just ask the questions. Don't give me your autobiography. I'm the one who writes autobiographies. So.
And
yes.
We're here to listen to him.
Okay.
Who's handling mics?
This is in the middle, so quickly, yes. Is there a... Not Marathi playwright, the whole Marathi theatre. You see, the whole tradition of 19th century theatre even in North Karnataka, comes from Marathi. It's very strange that Marathi theatre starts in 1952 from Kannada. A Kannada group goes to Sangli, and the Patwardhan there plays the play. It inspires Vishnu Pant Bhave to write the first Marathi play, and the Marathi tradition starts. But by 1880s, the Marathi theatre is so strong and so vibrant that it influenced Kannada theatre. So it was impossible, since I knew Marathi very well, not to be influenced. So, Adya was the only person, but there were any kind of Mogar Ranganekar, any kind of, Pula Deshpande, the whole generation of writers who taught us how to write plays. And even now, I have translated plays of El Kunchuar, who I think is a very good playwright.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಸರ್, ನಾನು ಕನ್ನಡ ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾತಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಆಂಗ್ಲ ಭಾಷೆ ಉಪಯೋಗ ಆದಷ್ಟು
ಹೇಳಿ.
ಯುವರ್ ಅನುಮತಿ ನೀವು ಬೆಳೆದು ಬಂದಿರೋ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಆವಾಗ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿತ್ತು. ನಿಮಗೆ ಅವಕಾಶವಾಗಿ ನೀವು ಬೇರೆ ದೇಶಕ್ಕೂ ಹೋಗು ಬಂದ್ರಿ. ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಲಿಬ್ರಲ್ ಅಟ್ಮಾಸ್ಫಿಯರು, ಇಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಬ್ರಾಹ್ಮಣಿಕಲ್ ಅಟ್ಮಾಸ್ಫಿಯರು, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂಥರ ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ಜಗಳ ಬಂತು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಲಿಬ್ರಲ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವೆಷ್ಟು ಸಂಕುಚಿತವಾಗಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ನಮ್ಮ ಥಾಟ್ ಪ್ರೊಸೆಸ್ ಹೆಂಗಿತ್ತು ಅಂತ. ಆವಾಗ ನೀವು ಬರೆದಿರೋ ಕಾದಂಬರಿಗಳು, ಕಥೆಗಳು ಅವೆಲ್ಲ ಒಂಥರ ರಿವೋಲ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದು. ಆ ಥರ ರಿವೋಲ್ಟದ್ದು ಕಥೆಗಾರರು ಇನ್ನು ಸಿಗ್ತಾರಾ?
No, I don't know. I think the question should have been aimed at Anant Murthy, not me. But the point is, the question is, why is there, the West provided a kind of liberal impetus to Indian literature. Is that impetus still there? Well, yes, it's still there. I mean, we look at the way. Ultimately, you want to grow from within, and you take what you like. I mean, it's the colonial education was certainly a very strong influence. That isn't there anymore. Now we are now our education, our cultural traditions are all in our own hands. But ultimately, the world has become smaller. England is smaller. When I went to England, it used to take 3 weeks, and the whole family came and wept as though I had died, actually. On the ship, this used to kind of happen. But today it doesn't happen. You go, you come, you can take what you like, and you need not take what you like. So that is a great advantage, I think.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಸರ್, ನಾನು ನಿನ್ನೆನೇ ನಾಟಕ ಓದೋದು ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಆ್ಯಕ್ಚುಲಿ ನಿನ್ನೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೆ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಮದುವೆ ಆಲ್ಬಮ್ ನಿಮ್ಮ ನಾಟಕ ಓದಿದೆ. ಆ ನಾಟಕ ಆ್ಯಕ್ಚುಲಿ ನೀವು ಅಂದರೆ ಧಾರವಾಡ ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೀಬೇಕಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ಲಿಲ್ವಾ? ಅಂದರೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಎರಡೂ ಕಾಂಬಿನೇಷನ್ ಇದೆ, ಧಾರವಾಡ ಮತ್ತು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರು ಭಾಷೆದು. So
no, the question is, why didn't you write the Madhve album on the Dharwad language? Madhve album is not the present play, but the play before a wedding album, because that family, this is one of the dangers that you come with the realism when you come to modern this in Indian languages. When I wrote Taledanda, the problem that suddenly hit me, which was about the 11th century revolution against caste, suddenly it hit me that each caste has its own dialect. So they can all sit together and say, no, we'll deny caste. We will be all by one caste. But one caste, but what language will they speak? Will they speak the Brahminical language? Will they speak the Lingayat language? Will they speak, and that, half the charm of that play for me comes from that each character speaks in a different kind of, they're all trying to be one, but they're all talking in different dialects. Now, in English, of course, this disappears in my play. But the problem, of course, continues even in Wedding Album, which is that the family I was dealing with was a Konkani family. And I wanted to make it clear that they were not Dharwad, Deshast Brahmin family. They were Konkani Saraswat Brahmin family. And to express this in Kannada, because they speak Konkani at home. You see, so these are sort of circus acrobatics that you need to do if you are sensitive to the possibilities of language.
Yeah,
but that's what
it all
makes
gets flattened out in English, unfortunately.
In English, it gets flattened out.
But we gain other things. We get to read plays that we otherwise couldn't read. So,
Yes,
can we take the questions past the first 2 rows and past young men?
Yeah.
Sir, could you please share some experience about Malgudi days? Like you played the father of Swami. That's...
Well, there were not too many. There was only one experience. I just followed what Shankar Nag asked me to do. if you ask for my experiences as a playwright, I can tell you hundreds. But if you ask for my experiences as an actor, this is my reply, which is that you act for the director. In theatre and films, there is no other existence. You try to work it out between themselves, but ultimately, if the director says that's okay, that's okay. And if you're not satisfied with it, you're not satisfied with it. Nasiruddin Shah recently has written an autobiography, and he says when first dealt with Shyam Benegal, he was very frustrated that Shyam wouldn't let him do another take. But Shyam would say, it's okay, that's enough. And then he discovered it was okay. You know, ultimately a good director senses what is enough, he doesn't need more. So even with Malgudi Days, no. The real charm of Malgudi Days comes from R.K. Narayan's stories, of course, which are beautiful. And the point is that Shankar Nag was sensitive to the humor of the plays, the undercurrent of humor. Because there are other Kannada plays, Banker Margaya and so on, made by my colleagues, based on R.K. Narayan's, and they fall flat because, you know, they don't have that undercurrent of irony and humor that makes R.K. Narayan.
So you directed at least one film and at least one play. Do you enjoy directing? Do you enjoy directing?
Now, how does one answer the question? Yes,
Like
I enjoy
around.
directing. You see, the point is I enjoy writing plays most. And then I enjoy directing films, particularly films. And a play like Vandanando Kaladalli, for instance, which was about 13th century warriors, you know, where I discovered Shankar Nag, you know, or Utsav, which was based on, you know, this is what I must say. I forgot to mention this, which is that the one play in our entire repertoire which is about a city is Mruchakatikam.
Right, of course.
You know, the Sanskrit play Mruchakatikam, I always say to my colleagues, if you want to write a play on Bangalore, start with Mruchakatikam. Because you find in it, there are no heroes, no heroines. There is, of course, all the stock characters, golden-hearted prostitute, the Brahmin who's desolate, you know, the thief, this, all that, the slave. But every character is from a different class. Every character reacts differently. And they have a different take on what the city is, where to go, what to steal. And if you think of it, this was, in fact, when I did Utsav, this was an attempt to recreate that excitement. When you read Mruchakatikam, you can almost visualize which is the goldsmith street, which is the prostitute street, which is the street next to the palace, you know, where are the soldiers, so on and so on. And it's amazingly visual. And that kind of excitement, when you read it, then you feel that I must possess it. Ultimately, Ramanujan used to say something which has always stayed with me. He used to say, you translate a work because you want to possess it, because you're jealous that you didn't write it.
That is absolutely
someone else.
true. Yeah.
And you feel, and I felt that with Anantmurti Samskara. When I read it, I said, who is this Anantmurti to write a novel like this? I mean, how could he write? I should have written it. I mean, you know. And he's gone and written it. So after that, I suddenly decided how to make a film of it and pursued it. And we found all kinds of money and so on and so on. So ultimately, whether it's translation, whether it's filmmaking, or when it's based on a particular work of art, it's an attempt to grasp that. I'm not talking of the commercial versions of, you know, Gone with the Wind, not that kind of thing. But really, when you're confronted with a work of art which you feel you had written. And sometimes you can recreate that experience, yes.
Namaskara, Mr. Karnad. One small question taking off a small thread of your answer. You would like to possess a piece of art. We people like to possess you as ambassadors of art. What we have done in the past or until now is possess something which has come from the past or the present. It could be contemporary, it could be works of history. But do playwrights, yourself or anyone for that matter, should be pointing towards the future and guiding or giving an example to people, telling, this is what we are, this is what we should be, or at least giving a pointer, and let us discover for ourselves.
Well, I think the main thing for an artist to be is to sincere to himself. That is the first thing, not to be the leader of the nation, to lead society and so on. It's a very dangerous occupation to be a leader of the country. I'm sorry to say this, but U.R. Anantmurti once said in an interview that the problem with becoming a public figure is that then you build that figure outside you and internalize it and it ruins you. Unfortunately, it happened to Anantmurti. You see, it's a very, if you look at Anant Murthy's work, after he became the chairman of the Sangeet Natak Academy, after he became the Gyanpith Award winner, he became a public figure, a very strong public figure, but he couldn't write. It just killed his talent, and we kept telling him why. Well, it was a healthy development in the sense that he developed issues, he didn't freeze and he didn't go to seed, but he stopped being a writer. I mean, after Samskara, he wrote a very good short story called the son of the Suryana Kudure, the sun's horse, which is translated as the stallion of the sun, or whatever it is, and by Narayan Hegde and so on. And that was the last he wrote. And ultimately, after that, he kept trying to write, but the public figure, he became increasingly conscious that he represented South Asian literature, that he had to represent represent Hindu society. He had to understand our past. All kinds of concerns which were not really his concerns as a writer, I think. And I'm afraid to say that it affected him, and it worries me that it may happen.
I was going to ask, how do you remain a writer? Because you're also chairman of this.
Yeah, exactly. This is one has to be continually conscious of the fact that one may just freeze and end. And then it may be better that one doesn't write anymore, leave the audience alone, be happy and not produce. But it can't be helped. I mean, the best example is Hemingway. Hemingway, as he was getting old, he kept saying, time is running out, I write. But ultimately he killed himself because, he couldn't write anymore. I mean, he committed suicide. And that's it. You reach a point where you feel that I survive by writing. My existence means to me that my writing, and if I can't do that, then my existence has no meaning. It does happen.
Sir, this is Vikram. Like nowadays, people read more Facebook than books, and people write in blogs. So what do you think about future literature, like electronic literature or electronic media?
Facebook. I'm not on the Twitter. I deliberately keep out of it because someone said to me, if you get on to Twitter or Facebook, you will spend all your life answering questions. People will say, what do you mean by this? So you have to answer, and then you have to answer. So instead of sitting back and thinking for yourself, what is my attitude to a particular, you spend all this time in being too public. No, I didn't. So I can't say, and I really can't comment on the electronic nature of literature. I'm only interested in writing, and writing a good play, and I hope I can write another play, and I hope it's good. That's all I can say.
So which is your favorite play? Your own favorite play of your own work?
The standard answer to that is my next one.
No. Give us an unstandard answer. Yeah.
No, but it's true. I mean, you forget. I mean, someone was asking me about Tughlaq today. Yes, you remember, but that was 30, 40 years ago. It was another me, I hope. I hope I've grown out of it. I don't want to think of Tughlaq. I don't want to think of Taladanda. I don't want to justify. I want to think of what I'm writing next.
That's fantastic. Yeah. May you stay forever young like this. One last question from the audience. Yes, the gentleman.
Girish, namaskara. I have a few questions here. I'll keep it short.
One.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have seen a lot of chest thumping happening to what public intellectuals have said. For example, what your Anant Murthy has said about whatever he did when he was young. The chest thumping happens pretty often in a very large scale. My question is the chest thumping a curtain to our pusillanimity? Point one, first point. Second, you talked about you giving your own thoughts to Tipu Sultan's dreams. It begs a certain amount of empathy. Another public intellectual who writes a lot about Nehru has actually fallen in love with him. Where is the line? Third, from Samskara to Ek Tha Tiger, why Ek Tha Tiger? Thank you very much.
Well, let me start with the third question. Ek Tha Tiger, because it was lots of money. We made Samskara in 95,000 rupees, and I was the manager of Oxford University Press, and I was allowed to take my office car, on vacation. So I didn't tell my office. I took the office car and used it as production car because we didn't have money. Oxford University Press still doesn't know how much they contributed to that essay. You see, it's like Naipaul says that he used BBC stationery to write his novel because he couldn't afford it. You try to do that. Well, that's the third question. Chest thumping, I don't know. Some associations of being a gorilla comes into it because I think they do that. And what is the second question?
Sir, the second question was on the empathy. Where does the line end?
Well,
Becomes
that,
ridiculously
of course,
romantic at some
you
times.
see, this invariably happens when you write, when you act, and even if you are doing acting a villainish character, even if you are doing Richard III, if you cannot feel the inside of that character, then you can't do it. You've got to feel that, yes, that would, you don't have to feel that he was a villain. But in that situation, that's how I would have done. And this is why Shakespeare is a great playwright. Even when you're doing Iago, he persuades you that that's how Iago would have done. You know, and you don't, and I'll give you only one example. I wrote Tughlaq, and in those days, you know, it was considered fashionable to be atheistic. You know, you didn't believe, because you're all influenced by Sartre and Camus, you know, existentialism, and we all had to say God is dead, Nietzsche, and so on. So I started writing Tughlaq, and I decided that he was going to be an atheist, you know, and he was. Then as I was studying, writing about him, I found that at one point that this king was considered mad, had actually banned public prayer for 5 years. And I said, how strange that in the 13th century, among all these mad mullahs surrounding him, this character actually bans the public prayer, you know, and asks them to, you know, get at him, and so on. And I then felt that only a person who loved God could have done that. You know, only a person who was deeply religious could have banned prayer, because prayer meant to him. The other sultans could have just banned it because it didn't mean anything, just another prayer ban. But to be able to do something as insane as that. So I started writing, and in fact my whole novel is about that, about why he banned it and why he didn't ban it and so on. So yes, the character grows on you, and it should grow on you, otherwise you can't write. I mean, you know, yesterday, well, Mamta, Sagar was saying, everyone thinks of you as Pranesh Acharya. But, you know, because that's the figure there is. But that's because I just loved the character. Yeah. And for 3 weeks when I did it, I was Pranesh Acharya. I just gave up smoking, I gave up drinking meat, didn't give up drinking, but the rest of it all. Yeah. So you have to get into a certain kind of discipline.
Well, a lot of people think of you as Swami. Are you Swami? Are you the husband from Swami?
Well,
I should ask your wife. Yeah, not to you.
It was also Basu Chatterjee, one of Basu's best films. It was also, I must tell you, a pleasure to work with someone like Shabana. Because Shabana, you know, waves come out of her. You know, you're acting with her, and waves emanate from her, prodding you to act in a particular way, respond, and so on. She's a marvelous actress to work with. In fact, when I was doing Nishant, there was a scene where she was acting my wife. I'll mention this, and I have to be friendly to her. I have to be nice to her, and I couldn't. I was freezing. It was my first, well, somehow the character wasn't coming through. And suddenly I felt she was standing next to me. And I suddenly felt something, and I looked down, and with her foot, she was gently rubbing my foot. You know, like that, in a very erotic fashion. When I looked down and I looked up, and the scene came. I was her husband after all. I mean, you know, and that one little help from an actress to say, what a wife may do if she likes her husband. Now, this kind of thing happens all the time, and it's very important, and it grows. I mean, that's the way you grow. Ultimately, if you are a good actor, and if you survive for a long time, you believe that you build up a technology of it. You build up the techniques of it. And Nasiruddin Shah's autobiography is a super example of how a very gifted actor, to be gifted is a handicap. You know, he's already gifted. He doesn't have to do anything. I mean, you know, he can do anything. So he has to struggle against his gift to become a good actor. You know, and I think with all great musicians, with all great dancers, with all great actors, being very gifted is a problem. Because then you can remain second rate. You can remain someone like Bhimsen Joshi has always been an example to me, because God had given him everything. There was no further to go, and he seemed intent on destroying it by drinking, driving fast, and so on. But ultimately he became great because he wanted to be great. You have to struggle, and you have to say, no, I won't accept easy solutions. I have to go beyond. And that's very important.
You struggle to be a playwright? Do you feel that?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. I was, 10 years ago, I was Minister of Culture in London. And the Minister of Culture in London is given entertainment allowance by the government to take important people to different artistic events. If you look at my diary, I took many important people to many important artistic events, because all those artistic events were theatre. Because I wanted to see the play. And, in London, a ticket costs £40. I can't afford it. So what I did was that I brought it in my duty. I said to my guests, now look, there is this marvelous play. Would you like to see it? Yes. So I would take them. So I would see the play, and I would see another new play, and so on. And 3 years in London was like a fresh education. London is a marvelous place for theatre, like New York is. And I just sat there, goggle-eyed. And to my coming back to writing about the city, to my coming back to writing about, broken images and all that, I'm sure those 3 years in London where I saw modern theatre, contemporary theatre, they added a lot, that I must admit.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
so honest as you always are. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. It was such a wonderful session to listen to both of you. I would just like to remind you that you can further interact with Mr. Girish Karnad in the book signing event. The book signing tent is just behind the help desk. And since this edition of the BLF is dedicated to the memory of the late Dr. U.R. Ananthamurthy, do visit a photo exhibition of him in the cafeteria. I started